Hi, and welcome back to the Money Making Mamas podcast. I'm Nancy Wallace-Fobbs.
And I'm Kelsey Laka.
And if you didn't know, we are a mother-daughter duo. We're having a mother-daughter duo day, right? And we decided to go into business together about a year ago, and we teach moms how to invest in real estate. So we thought it would be fun to do a podcast because, I don't know, we're kind of immortalizing us.
Sure.
This would be fun. keep downloading.
Support us.
And also a good way to share tidbits and tips about life, about real estate investing. And so we have a good one today.
Yeah,
right?
I'm excited because if you missed it, we'll just jump in. No, we're gonna wait a second on that.
Okay.
Because I wanted to talk about this.
Okay, what
really
is it?
Quick? Because one thing that we missed last week. Okay, so we always talk about holidays, like in our podcast. Like that's how we've been documenting our time or keeping track.
Oh yeah, it's Memorial Day, and then okay.
So last episode was Memorial Day, but we forgot to mention that it was Mother's Day, that we didn't record in the time, you know what I mean? Like we took a couple weeks off, and so we didn't even talk about our own day.
And then now Father's Day is coming up.
Father's Day is coming up.
So I said to Kelsey, I was like, okay, we should do a poll. Like, what's more important, Mother's Day or Father's Day?
Well, and not even that, but I'm just so curious to hear everyone's experiences because, okay, your husband was out of town.
And I spent the weekend with you guys.
You did, but
I said he's not my mom. I'm not his mom. So.
I know, but like I always feel like the spouse is also supposed to help make that day like special. Okay. You know, right. I don't know. Anyways, it's different. Whatever. No, my day was good. Yeah, you came over. It was fun. I will say it was a nice day. We hung out and we just did the blow up pool that we got and made little foods. But I told Zach, I think it was Saturday morning, okay, and like all week I've been trying, and I'm sure like I'm so curious if this is how other moms felt, but I am such a planner in my head, and like, you know, as I feel like the common denominator between all husbands and spouses is that maybe they're not as much planners as we are, you know, mom managers. And so, you know, leading up to the day, I was like, I'm not going to say anything. Zach's going to plan it out. It's fine. I'm not going to micromanage him, all this stuff. And we'll just see what happens, right? So then, like, you know, Saturday rolls around and I recognize, because I cook dinner and, like, you know, I know what's in our fridge and what's in our pantry. And so I was like, well, Zach, have you thought about Sunday? You know, and, like, he tried to play a joke and he was like, what's Sunday? I was like, don't. Not in the mood. Anyways, I'd be like, well, what are we doing for dinner? What are we doing for lunch? Like, things like that. So one tradition that I do like that we've kept is we do a date night. And so we did our date night on Mother's Day, but we did it on Saturday night.
I remember you have to have a babysitter. So who was the babysitter on date night?
No, I know, but that's not what I was getting at. Okay. I was getting at, we had to end up going to the grocery store on our date night because someone didn't plan the groceries in time, and then it was fine.
I know, but you haven't been married as long as I have, so my expectations are a lot lower on mothers. And I've raised my kids, you know what I mean? And so having a weekend to myself was actually, I totally enjoyed it. So he got to go. He races sometimes, and part is his hobby, and so he got to go do his thing. Just happened to be on Mother's Day. Now, Father's Day.
And then here I am, like thinking, like, you know, a couple weeks in advance. Oh, I wonder what my husband wants, or what should we do for Father's Day? Now, luckily for us, it's kind of easy because we just say, hey, we're gonna go to the lake, but it's like a whole weekend. You know what I mean? And then he's doing his shooting event on like Saturday, and
yeah, because they have their hobbies. So
no, I know, but it's just funny because I don't know.
I just think, you know,
I'm not
women probably have higher expectations.
I don't think it's even higher expectations. I just want.
I don't know.
Okay, I feel like it's one day, and I told Zach, I was like, I don't want to make any decisions. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to make any plans. I don't want, like, I feel like that's fair. That's not high expectations. That's fair to ask, or like for him to cook dinner one time, or like, yeah, if Bear's butt needs to be wiped, it's him doing it, not me. And so, you know,
I think I've just learned over the years that if you want to have like a special day, you have to plan it and tell people. Otherwise, you get really disappointed that it didn't happen
I
exactly
don't know.
what-
I feel like if you say, hey,
I'm saying as an older person, I'm saying that I've learned that if I want the day to be a certain way,
it's not even that I wanted it to be a certain way. I just wanted, I didn't want to make all the decisions.
Okay.
Anyways.
Anyway, so Father's Day. And you're right, we make it easy for them because we go to the lake. They like to fish, drink beer, ride the boat, you know.
But
so.
I'm curious. So if any, for anyone out there that has any family or mother and / Father Day traditions, I just want to know, not want to know for my own, but I'm just curious if that's a thing in your household. If there's certain, I remember Father's Day for Pops, we used to go to the bowling. We did bowling.
Oh, we
all
did
the time.
bowling, yeah, when the kids were younger. And then when my dad was alive, we always, I don't even care how old I was, we had to be there. You know, we always had a barbecue and kind of that was his day to honor.
Yeah.
And all of that. And it started in the morning and ended at night.
And, you passed that on because you were I just want, you passed that on to yourself too. Because I remember a lot of Mother's Day was like that, but that's fair. But I know some moms that are no, I don't want anything to do with my family. I just want the day to be in a hotel by myself, or you all go outside and go do something or whatever it is. So it's just funny. So
I don't know if this was true, but I heard a thing that Madonna on Mother's Day, all she wanted was for all of her kids. Now I think she has two. I don't, maybe more. And she wants them to just bring her breakfast in bed and just tell her how great she is, because the whole rest of the year it's just, give me. So I don't know if that's true or not, if it was Madonna or some other celebrity. It was a celebrity, but they were I just want my kids to come into the bedroom and idolize me and tell me how great I am because of all this, and she's the it word. So.
Yeah, that's so funny. Well, yeah, so to our listeners, is there any traditions that you have for Mother or Father's Day? I would love to hear it.
Yeah, drop it down below, because then next year we'll come back and we'll go, oh, remember we talked about that on podcast number 19, because we forgot Mother's Day, but now we're honoring the dads. But that's okay, because last week we were talking about how men always ask us, because we talked about our starter pack, right? For moms, and they're always well, what about dads?
Yeah.
No matter what event we go to, well, what about the dads? Dads just encourage the moms.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well, what are we talking about today, Kelsey?
Yeah. So, early on, we did an episode about short-term rentals, and that was actually a fun episode. I didn't, sometimes when we bring up our topics, or if you bring up a topic to me, I'm yeah, I don't know about that, but and I know vice versa too. But our short-term rental episode was actually really good. It was one of my favorite episodes to record. So if you haven't heard that one, go back and listen. I think it's a really good one. And so today, then last week we mentioned that we are, on the hunt again for our own properties to invest in that we're really partnering on. So the first time that I invested in, Mom really was okay, do this, sign this, and here's that, kind of situation. So this time we're going in, we're looking at all different kind of properties, which fingers crossed we might have found one. So we'll keep you updated about that in the next couple episodes. But anyways, so I thought it would be good to talk about long-term rentals.
Okay. And
kind of the do's and don'ts there, and just kind of how to go about that situation, all the way from finding a property to making sure you have the right tenants in there, and how do you handle the AC goes out at 11 p.m. at night and things like that. So I thought it would be a good episode just to kind of dive into that.
Okay. And I did used to be a property manager, but I don't do that anymore. But so I'm going to bring some of that. So, we talked about, the finding the property, right? So my criteria for long-term rentals have always been 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 15, 18, I talk about a lot of times, because you can rent them all day long. I had very little vacancy.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, I used to do leases that were 2 years, and I like that. Since COVID, I don't do that anymore because they, some people, that didn't happen to us, but where the tenant stopped paying, you couldn't evict them, so I don't really like that. So I tend to do 6 months to 12 months now. Leases at a time. I'm going to kind of say some things that I didn't do very well in the beginning. That I didn't do enough rent increases over the years, And so I kind of, when you have long-term tenants, you know, you kind of weigh, okay, they're a good tenant versus, you know, if they move, then you have to do all these, you know, upgrades and maintenance on the
Right.
property, that kind of thing. So, but just to start off, the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, that's always been my criteria because it rents easily.
Yeah.
You know, 1 baths I don't do
Yeah.
because if you think about it, 3-bedroom, usually, you know, it's usually gonna be families that rent your property, and just think about even if you have 2 people in the house, it's nice to have that extra bathroom, right?
Right.
Because you never know. You
Yeah.
just need to do it, and they're just easier to rent. Then the next thing I look for is I look at, would I or my at the time, my child live here, right?
Yeah.
So it might not be the nicest house, but it will be safe,
Yeah.
right? So I look for things that, like I'm looking at it as like, okay, would I feel comfortable living in this neighborhood? Would I feel comfortable, you know, raising my kids in this neighborhood?
Yeah.
And again, I'm going after the tenants that I'm looking for people that would probably want to buy a home, but they just can't for right now.
Right.
Or they have other things, they don't really want the upkeep of a house.
Yeah.
I'm looking for people that want to rent and raise a family. So
Yeah.
I typically look at school areas, you know, it doesn't have to be like top rated, but it has to be decent, can't be the
Yeah.
bottom of the barrel. And so once I identify the property, and I also, you know how much the rent is I can charge in that area, then after I've got all that and I've closed on the property, the next thing is to find the tenant. And so I think where investors fall down is they don't know how to screen the tenant,
Yeah.
how to attract the right tenant and how to keep the right tenant,
Yeah.
right? So it first starts with the property.
Hold on, you're jumping real
Oh, yeah, I'm
ahead.
sorry.
We're not
Okay.
even there yet. We haven't even found our property.
Okay.
So we're light years ahead. So
Okay.
yeah, so I think the property, and one thing that if you missed in our last episode, we talked about our Mom Investor Starter Pack, which has several tools to help you buy your first investment properties, and one of those is the market analyzer tool and the neighborhood checklist. And both of those things can help a ton when you're finding the property. So like you were saying, make sure it's good, like there's a good school nearby. Maybe there's some parks. Maybe is it an HOA? Is it not an HOA? Would a house in an HOA be a good property to have as a long-term rental?
Actually, I've had both, and so there's pros and cons. So on one hand, a good HOA, like if the tenant is not taking care of the yard, you're going to be notified. If the tenant and you can put all these things in the lease too. But so if the HOA, you have to be familiar with what the HOA do's and don'ts are, right? So like a lot of times if a HOA has a pool, like so if I'm gonna do an HOA, I want it to have amenities.
Yeah.
Not just like, oh, mow your grass kind of thing. But when I do have a property in an HOA, then if as a landlord, I also need to make sure that my tenant knows that the property has an HOA. And here's the rules of the HOA, and you have to put that in the lease. So if they violate the rules, then the HOA doesn't go after the tenant, they come after the landlord.
Yep.
So, but yes.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I think property wise, I agree with you. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and that's just I think from just being around you and all the houses that you've had.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, a 4-bedroom will rent, a 5-bedroom maybe a little harder, but the maintenance cost, that's the other reason I stay, because that square footage of between 15 and 1800, I mean, it might be a little bit bigger, they're not usually smaller, but you know, then you get into the cost of, you know, painting and carpet, so that's the other reason I go with that size of property.
So one area that I've always been curious about is like timelines. So okay, when we're finding a house, say there's 2 houses. One is like more turnkey. Okay, like great, that would be fantastic because you would buy it and like, you know, immediately rent it out. But at what point do you say, okay, there's too much work on this for the timeline to, because I imagine you want to kind of buy it, fix it up maybe like in a month, and then have a tenant in it right away. So what is a good timeline?
So that's a good question. So you can do a lot of things to cut the timeline by being prepared in advance. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is I'm talking about getting, finding out where you're going to get the money.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you've identified a property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, going in and then let's just talk about what needs to be done. So if it's foundation, I mean, you're going to have to hire somebody. So
Right.
do you already have, so my question then would be, do you already have vendors that you can use? Because you might close on a house and then you find out the vendor can't get out there for 2 or 3 weeks because everybody's buying a house and you don't want to just on foundation, you want to go with a good company. So sometimes they have 2-3 weeks wait.
Yeah.
So what I do is if I know I'm looking at a property, then I go ahead and contact that foundation company and go, hey, when can you go out there? And a lot of foundation companies will go out during your inspection, so you can do that ahead of time. So that's good. Because if there's foundation problems, you have to have that one, that has to be done first before you can do anything.
Yep.
And then the next thing you're gonna need is a plumbing test. So you have to almost know when you walk into a house, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna need foundation work.
Yep.
As I'm moving forward to the closing table, I'm also making calls to my foundation. Hey, can you go out there and give me an estimate? Okay, great. Now the plumber's not going to do that. They could do a post plumbing test, but it doesn't really matter because when the foundation is going to be done, you have to have that. What would that be? So there's a pre and a post. So as far as a timeline, it really depends on, do you have the money to do the rehab, or are you going to do it yourself? So we've done both, right? Where we didn't have the money, but we knew how to do it, like paint carpet. So it really depends on, and then your cash flow, as far as like how much money can you hold it?
Yeah.
So that's what you're really talking about. So it comes down to money.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, I think in an ideal world, really you just almost need like to redo flooring and paint.
Yeah.
Because let's talk about so let's just say we found the perfect house. It's good schools are nearby. Maybe it's not an HOA, is an HOA. It's funny, I do know a couple of, my husband just started tree trimming in our neighborhood, and he has run into a couple of houses that they are tenants, and they've been really nice, but they're like, hey, FYI, like I gotta get this done before my landlord like gets on me about it. So it's just funny that you bring that up. But anyways, so we found the house. It's not in an HOA. Okay, we're gonna get it done. Let's hope it's not foundation issues. So paint and floors, those are kind of like, I think from my big thing is like you want to make it neutral and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word, but not sustainable, but durable.
Yes. So okay, so good. So I would not, on a rental, I usually go with tile, not vinyl plank. I mean, they are making it more and more sturdy, but it's, I don't think, as far as I know, it's not waterproof, right? Vinyl will get torn. So tile is usually pretty durable. And then I'll do carpet in the bedrooms because nobody really likes, tile floors in a bedroom. Although I did do one rental property and it already had the vinyl plank, so we just kept them. And again, it goes back to your tenant, but you can't screen for this. And she took very good care of the floors. In the property management days, I had an owner that he had real wood floors. He got transferred and he had a very nice house and he wanted to rent it out. And I mean, we did take it on, but the thing is he made the tenant sign this waiver about the care of his wood floors. I mean, he didn't mind if he had pets, but I mean, he wanted like a $5,000 deposit. I just told him, you know what, you cannot do that because if you want to rent your property out, and you have wood floors, you just need to know that they're probably going to get scuffed up.
Well, it's going to be lived in, especially if you're, oh my God, I mean, like I look at my own family. And like, especially if you have littles, I mean, I can think of 5 holes I have in the wall. Just now.
Well, and he was a single guy. And
we're getting them repaired, but still.
And he was a single guy.
Yeah.
So he just, he had rugs everywhere. So he had a lot of stipulations. So let's talk about becoming an accidental landlord. Because that happened a lot when people got transferred and they didn't want to sell their house. They just, because they were going to be somewhere for a year or whatever. And they became what I call an accidental landlord. They did not set out to be a landlord for whatever reason. They couldn't or didn't want to sell their house, and it was just a eye opener for them about what our process was when we took on landlords, because they, as a property manager, I don't want high maintenance landlords or high maintenance owners, because it makes my job 10 times harder, right? And we have to have, I guess, complete control over the property. Now, I'm not saying we're going to screen them, and we had a stellar reputation about the types of people we got in there and that kind of thing, but you just can't take on owners that have expectations that, like you said, people are going to live in the house, and sometimes things happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you don't always have to go with the property management so I guess we'll sidebar really quick.
Yes.
But I feel like for us, because we have the background in property management, like obviously you, but I have a little bit too, but at what point do you say, hey, I should get a property manager?
When you run out of time.
Yeah. Okay.
So, because I finally got to the point where it was hard for me because I was a property manager, but I got to the point where I just couldn't manage, all the properties effectively, in terms of like, it was just taking too much time, and I needed to free up my time. But my problem arose was because I used to train property managers, so finding one that I felt, and I'm a bit of a control freak, so
we've addressed that a couple times.
But we finally did, and after I did it, and it took, I would say, a good 60 days before I was probably one of those high maintenance landlords, before I could finally let go, and I was like, oh, okay.
How many properties do you have under your belt at that point?
So we were doing like over 100. So okay, time out. Okay, I don't want to ask.
I wasn't asking as a property management person. I was asking as a person who owned the houses.
Yeah, I don't want to say that either.
Okay, well, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to say how many.
Don't be mean.
I just don't want to say that part. I don't, because when people ask me that, I don't answer that question.
Okay.
Because it goes to like, okay, well, she only had 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
you could have just made up a number, and no one would have known.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay. Well, I feel like that was a good conversation. Okay, well, I don't know where to pick it up now. Okay, so how do you want to go back?
Okay, well, I guess you can ask the question, how many were you managing at that time?
Just start off saying, I think I was managing.
Okay.
Or I think I had about however many.
Okay.
I mean, 10 properties is fine. Okay. For you to own 10 property, right? Or no?
Well, I don't want the question to be, well, how many do you own now?
That's not what it is.
Okay. Oh, so at the
you've
time.
already addressed that you don't own any now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe just say, well, you say, well, back when our focus was long-term rentals, we probably had about 10 properties that we handed over to a property manager.
And I was managing 125.
But when you were, so differentiate the two. I'm asking you as an investor who has long-term rentals.
Okay.
That you.
At what point did I turn it over to a property manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I got it. So
I'm not asking about your property manager, you as a property manager.
Okay, gotcha. So.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so just say.
I'm just gonna say at the time, I think we had about 8 to 10 when I finally decided to turn it over.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, you're gonna start. I'm gonna go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you're gonna go. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, at the time when we finally decided to turn over the properties, I think we had about 8 to 10 long-term rentals or whatever, and I just kind of got to the point where I was like, we automated as much as we could, but there's still, you're still on call.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. So, yeah, I think and I only ask that just for, people who are, like, it's their goal to be a long-term rental investor. You can only handle, just like every other situation, you can only handle so much for so long. Yeah. And you don't want to mess up at the end of the day. Like, property managers are, you are managing, like, lots, at a time.
Yes. And so also I think that you come to a point where you're just, I wanted to do other things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of grow and expand. Now, I do think that when you're new, that it's good for you to learn how to manage, because when you do get ready to hire a property manager, and we like actually teach exactly what to ask a property manager, because just because they say, oh, well, we're gonna charge you X dollars, you know, you don't know, you have to interview to get a good property manager.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to, having that, like, cosmetically, you know, and I think one thing that popped in my mind, too, and I was talking about trees and all that, so, make sure durable and whatnot, but you don't want to put a lot of money into landscape either.
Yes, exactly.
Because why?
Because the tenants they're not gonna water it, right?
No, they might not care about it like you do.
Yeah, they're not gonna care about your flower beds or your tulips or anything like that. So we go, well, in Arizona they called it xeriscape. Can't really do it here in Texas, but we go minimum.
Yeah.
Like so one thing about HOAs, I remember this one HOA, we had a property and I was like, oh my goodness, the tree kept dying because, you know, it was a fairly new community and all the front yards had a tree in it, and they all kept dying because the neighborhood was a lot of rentals.
Yeah.
And they were dying because the tenant wasn't watering them.
Yeah.
And they didn't care. They're like, and on this one property, and I always charge the tenant for it, but we probably, over the course of owning that property, probably put in 5 or 6 new trees every other year. Because they just, you know, because they would die, and then it'd be like 6 to 8 months before the HOA would catch it. But flowers and or weeds in the flower beds, like number one, you know, complaint from HOAs. So yeah, I didn't worry about if they died in the freeze and I didn't have to replace them, I never did.
Yeah. So don't spend a lot of money on your landscape. Another area, can you think of any? Appliances.
Yes. Okay, so I go low end. I don't go high end. I go white. I mean, maybe stainless steel, but scratch and dent, you know, I go because, again, durability, and tenants are probably, you know, I'm not going to put in a high-end dishwasher because tenants aren't going to take care of it like, you know, it should be taken care of. And, you know, I have found appliances, you know, dishwashers, the stove, the microwave, you know, they last as long as I need them to last. I mean, if I have to replace them like every 5-6 years, I'm good with that. So yes, and then we were talking briefly about the paint. I want to come back to that because I do neutral. So I might just do white walls, you know, if I'm going to paint, or cream color, very basic, you know, and then if tenants want to paint, they can, but in my lease, I say, you know, let's say they want to paint the walls purple, well, they have to paint them back, so I have certain criteria. But when you walk into one of my rentals, it's either going to be like white or
very just basic. Yeah, you're not trying to sell the property, like, you know, for...
I'm just trying to rent it. And then on blinds. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I have used those little 1-inch mini blinds, the plastic ones. But now you can get the faux 2-inch wood ones that are pretty good, and they're pretty durable. I found somewhat. Okay, maybe not.
No, I only say that. I only give you the look because you know my children. My children have ruined my blinds, but that's because they're.
But in most of my rentals, we've done, depending on the price point, we've done either the 1-inch, 1-inch plastic ones. Because you're right, because they have dogs that eat them or whatever.
Yeah. And
we've had a couple of high-end, like, townhomes or whatnot, and we have put, because usually that's a different clientele.
Right.
So, but if it's my 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you know, family, it's mini blinds all day long.
Yeah. So I think to say all of this, don't invest in your property, but don't, like, overly invest in it. Because, again, at the end of the day, is the tenant going to take, you know, no person is the same, and they're not going to take care of the lawn like you would. They're not going to take care of your carpets. You know, just like some families have dogs, but maybe they don't let them on the couches, like, or some families do. You know, you just never know. So, and I mean, you can screen your tenants as much as possible, but you're not going to know every single detail. You cannot
screen for certain things. I mean, you know, you just can't.
So I think that's a great segue. So let's talk about tenants. How do you find your perfect tenant?
So I have found my perfect tenants by putting a sign in the yard. It's the most cost effective because why? Because their friends live in the neighborhood. They tell them or whatnot, or they're driving by because they like the neighborhood because of the schools, right? So I have found putting a sign, and not even my real estate sign. You know, I have rented off of, you know, I can put it on the MLS because I'm a realtor, and I have rented to people that way as well. But putting a sign in the yard, I've gotten some of my best tenants that way.
Oh, I would have never guessed that.
Sign in the yard.
So just do you write just on a sign?
Yep, got a Home Depot sign, says for rent, phone number.
Mm.
And then, now I have done this where I've done like, now today, when we do our, I'm gonna have a QR code. Because when they call up, because here's what they want to know how much it is, do you take pets, you know, that kind of thing. And so I have an automated response. So they can call the number and it'll say, gives them all the general information, and then they can press 1 if they, you know, want to leave their name and number, or they can email me, and then I have an email automated response, and I have 4 questions. So when somebody's interested, here's my 4 questions. Number 1, when's your move-in date? Because my property normally is vacant today.
Yeah.
But if you have to give a 60-day notice, I'm not waiting unless you're paying the rent. So that's very important to ask. What's your move-in date? Number 2, do you have any pets? Okay, because if you have a pit bull, I take pets. I don't take pets that I'm going to get my insurance canceled.
Yeah.
Right? We're not going to talk about service animals. That's a whole different podcast. 3, how many people will be occupying the property? Now notice I didn't say how many people are in your family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to know how many people, and then they'll say, it's my wife, my husband, my partner, my 3 kids, whatever it is. They'll just tell you. And then the last thing is, what is the people that will be occupying the property? I'm not saying it the best way, but basically I want to know what is the income of the occupants, because I'm wanting to know, do they make 3 times the rent? So what have I done? I've already said, okay, you can't move in for 30, 60, 90 days. I'm getting somebody now.
Yeah.
Number 2, I'm already finding out if you have pets and what kind, and am I going to charge a pet deposit, which I do. It's non-refundable. 3, I'm going to find out how many people are going to be occupying the property. Yeah. Right, so if I have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they have 18 people, that's not going to work for me.
Right. By
the same token, if I have a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and they have 6 people, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And then number 4, I'm looking to see if they have the ability to pay. So those are my pre-screen questions. That will save you so much time. I have known investors who didn't use that. They just show anybody and everybody the property, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to show anybody the property or give access. Even if it's on the MLS, and now if it's on the MLS, a realtor is going to just go show it, and he or she's going to call me and go, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. Same questions.
Yeah.
Here's my questions, right back. Then, if it's off the sign, right, then after that, they have an application they fill out. So now we're going to do the background check. Yeah. Right? So on the application, they have to consent, they sign, saying that I can run their credit. Now, credit is really, people go, oh, well, what kind of credit score do you look for? I don't. Yeah. What I'm looking for is, do they pay their bills? Yeah. So if I see that they have collections for rent, or they have judgments from a past landlord, they're not gonna, And one of the things, as I'm saying all of this, they sign it's called a tenant selection criteria. And it's out there. I've created my own now, but basically it's something that the potential tenant, because they're applicants, so they're tenants, right? They have to sign it saying that they understand I'm running a background check and I'm verifying their income, and they have to give me an ID and all that kind of stuff, so that they know up front. And then if they don't want to do it, it's like, okay, well then don't pay me the application fee and I won't run your background check. So. Yeah.
I think there's so much that you could talk about tenants, like you yourself.
Oh, yes.
I think that could be 2 episodes alone.
Well, I will say this about, it's always fun to talk about the bad stories, but in general, so I managed for over 10 years a lot of doors, right? So it was like 125 properties by myself. I had a couple people helping, but I pretty much did that myself. And I will say that the stories, that of the tenants that broke the lease, they're fun to talk about, right? Yeah. The horror stories. But I would say 80 to 85% of the tenants that I managed never had a problem. Always paid their rent on time, left their property in, pretty good condition, and usually got their security deposit back. It was when and I think that was because we screened so well on the front end. And here's a tip. we didn't, so a lot of times you go and let's say the rent is $2,000, and so they'll say, okay, security deposit is $2,000. There's no rule that says you can only charge 1 month's rent for a security deposit. So we actually charged more. So whenever we advertised the property on the MLS, the security deposit, so let's say the rent was $2,000, so the security deposit minimally would be $2,200. So if people didn't have good credit, we never, we started more and more towards the end just charging one and a half times the security deposit. And I would just tell people, look, it's totally non-refundable. Here's what you need to do to get it back. And we would tell them that in their orientation. So I think that's why we always had a pretty good track record.
Just very communicative.
Yes, and transparent, you know. Because I want them to make my job easy.
Yeah, definitely.
I want you to do this, and then I we did a podcast, and it was on our YouTube channel, and some random tenant, because I haven't done property management in like a long time, and remember that comment, we deleted it, but it was like some random person, they were anonymous, and they said, oh, I remember when you used to manage properties and you were always so rude to me. Well, you were probably the tenant that didn't pay your rent.
Yeah, there's probably.
And there is a bad review out there on Google. You probably find it still, but it was from a tenant, and I didn't even say anything about it. She broke the lease and she left the place a mess and everything, and so she was mad, and she went and so if an owner writes you a bad review, that's a different story. But this was a tenant, so I was just like, you know what, I was doing my job because I work for the owner, not the tenant.
Right.
Yeah, so she was mad, and she went out there and wrote a bad review, and about, I don't know, I was at some networking meeting, this has like been years ago, and somebody brought that up, and I go, that's because I was a damn good property manager.
Yeah. She was mad because she broke the rules.
Yeah, she did. So
okay, so we found a good, tenant, we're ready to bring them in, all that stuff, they're gonna move in. So let's talk about rent prices and how you figure out your rent prices and just kind of how you go with the money from there.
Okay, so the rent prices are based on the market, right?
Which you could do in your market analyzer tool.
Yes, you can, because that's what we talked about. So you want to know, like, if your property's sitting on the market longer than it needs to be, it's probably overpriced, right? Because overpriced works the same as, as when you're selling a house. If it's sitting on the market, there's a lot of competition. I always tell people, just because you put in quartz countertop doesn't mean a tenant's going to pay $100 more a month in rent. They're just not.
Right.
So if the house next door only has corian and it's $50 less, that's what they're going to go for, right? So you want to make your house as neutral as possible, is what you were, talking about, and just nice, right? Clean.
Yeah.
So once the tenant you've done your background check and all that, then the next step is that you have, I used to have like a packet, I call it the tenant orientation, and they had to meet with me as the property manager, and this is when they get the keys. So in order to get the keys, so they get the lease agreement a couple days before they're gonna get the keys, or whenever, maybe a month ahead of time or something like that. But when they sign the sign the lease, so I've sent them the lease. If they have any questions, they can call me and ask me about it. And then the property is not leased until I get the signed the signed lease agreement and the security deposit and a cashier's check. Then the property is off the market, right? And so then let's say that they're moving in, in a couple days. So they'll come in to get the keys, and then they have to pay the first month's rent. Now, I get this all the time, but it worked like a charm. So if you have someone who's moving in on, let's say, some random day like the, 7th of May, right? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna start your lease agreement on May 7th, and you're going to collect in a cashier's check the first month's rent, security deposit, and any pet deposit, right? So you kept getting all that money. Now then on June 1, you're gonna prorate the rent that would have been for May 7th. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when to move in any of our properties, they have to pay 1 full month's rent plus the security deposit plus the pet deposit. Then the second month is prorated. Okay. Now why do I do that? It's because I want them to pay a full month's rent.
Yeah.
I want them to have skin in the game.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all spelled out in the lease agreement.
Yeah, so they know what they're signing up for. So they know.
It's not like, oh, okay. So once I get the money, and one thing that would happen, and we would get referrals for people to take over their property because they got the investment property, they signed a lease with the tenant, they gave the keys to the tenant a couple days ahead of time because they just wanted to put stuff in their garage. And then guess what? The tenant never paid. Or the landlord took a regular check and it bounced. And don't take cash either, okay? Because you, like if they say that they paid it, I mean, just don't. So, have a bank account.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have all of our properties under an limited partnership. You know, I think that's another topic that we talked about, you know, how to set up your entity, but I would strongly say the first couple ones, you don't need to do that, but you should have a separate bank account for your rental property. So you get the money, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds about this. So as a property manager, I had to keep the security deposits in a separate account from the properties I manage. But for mine, it just all went into the same.
Right.
You know, you just have to have a good accounting system. So anyway, go in there, and all of your expenses, like, so if I have to pay the HOA fee, if I have to, you know, do any work on the property.
Really quick, do you charge the tenant for the HOA fee, or do you still keep paying?
No, that's included, so they don't have to pay that, the owner, and I do specify that in, because here's why, I'll tell you that the tenant, I don't want the tenant doing it, because they're not gonna pay it.
Yeah.
So then guess what?
Yeah.
Then the
comes back to
HOA,
you.
comes back, and then I have this and that, so we have to pay it. So but the tenant gets to use the amenities. Again, it's all written in the lease, and the lease agreement, is about 16, 18 pages long, and just as a comparison, a contract to buy a house is about 9 or 10 pages long. So, and it can even be longer because we had an addendum, and we had a debt agreement, so everything is spelled out. Everything is spelled out. Anyway, so all the money you collect goes into a bank account, and then and it should be kept separate from your personal money. It shouldn't be commingled with any other you know, it should be a rental account.
Yeah.
So if you have, let's just say, I don't know, let's say you have a short-term rental, I would keep those bank accounts separate, right? Because it's separate income. I mean, because on a short-term rental, you're generally being paid from a platform like Airbnb or VRBO, but with a long-term rental, most of the time you're being paid by the tenant.
Right.
I have done deals where a church paid, you know, as a minister, and the church was paying the rent, or an employee was working and the company was paying the rent. But here's so ask me whose name is the lease in. Is the church or business? What do you think? So,
I don't know.
Okay, all right. So let me, this is what I would say to the owner. They'd say, well, should I put the church on there? Should I put the business? Okay, so if you have to evict them, can you evict the church?
Oh, no.
Is the church living there? No.
Yeah.
So but the church or the business is as a guarantor. So we're getting in the weeds there.
Yeah.
Okay, so get in the bank account. So I think one of the questions that came in is, what if you have money left over? Okay, well that's good. What's that called? Called cash flow.
Yeah.
But you need to keep it in there. Now you could have some bank accounts have like a savings account that have interest bearing. A lot of checking accounts aren't interest bearing, but you could look for a bank that does interest bearing, right? So that you could earn something on it.
Yeah.
On the security deposit account, we would earn, because you can write it in a property management agreement that you get to keep the interest that's earned on the account. So if you're managing properties and you have a escrow, it's called an escrow account, and it's earning $100 a month, and you have that in your property management agreement that you get to keep it, you do. It's all negotiable, right?
That's nice, yeah.
So, same, you know, that's kind of it. We'll talk about property management, like with working with owners, but this one is about the tenant. So really the money is paid to whatever entity. So let's say when Brian and I got our first rental property, it was in our names, you know, Brian and Nancy.
Yeah.
So the tenant wrote the check to Brian and Nancy.
Yeah.
Then fast forward, you know, maybe a couple of years, and we finally got our first land, we call it land league or whatever. And so then the tenant had to write the check to not Brian and Nancy, but to our entity, because we had, you know, now we did have a separate bank account at the time because that's what our mentor told us to do, but it was under Brian and Nancy. So we had to open a business, and once we got that established and whatnot, so, but yes, and then the bills, okay, so the bills, so let's say like I had to hire a plumber, So Nancy and Brian didn't write the check, the entity did.
Right.
So you keep everything, and it'll make your accountant's life, or if you're doing the taxes, a whole lot easier.
Right, definitely. Well, I can't think of, I mean, is there anything else that you want to bring up about long-term rentals?
No, they're a good investment. You know, the tax benefits, okay, so we're talking about like,
Oh, yeah.
the tax benefits are just so awesome. So, you know, anything and everything that has to do with that property, and that's why you want to keep it in a separate account. So if you do, so the HOA dues we were talking about, totally tax deductible. You know, so what happens with a rental, so let's say that you're getting $1,000 a month in rent.
Yeah.
And let's say all your expenses, property taxes, insurance, are $800 a month. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot more than that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we're just making it math easy. So that's $200 that would be considered passive income, right? So that's just on the income and expenses. But then you can deduct the mileage, right, if you drive over there. Or if you do manage your own properties, there's a certain hour, I forget how many hours it is a month. I want to say like 7 to 10 hours a month. If you're managing your own properties, there's a deduction for that.
Right.
So even though I have $200 cash in my pocket, there's intangible, or would it be tangible? Intangible. They're like not seen. It's not like a bill.
Right.
That can be intangible. That can be deducted off of that money. So at the end of the day, you won't pay any taxes, right?
Yeah.
Then you carry that over. The way our accountant did it, so, and I'm not a CPA, I'm just saying this is what he did. So he took all of our, and it was always negative, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And he put that negative, he carried that over to our maybe 1040, I think it is, so that we always saw a loss. Not because the properties were at a loss, but because that's how it works, right? I mean, that's like a totally legal thing you can do, because you get to deduct depreciation. Remember those appliances that we bought? Get to deduct those, and you can do that where it's instead of just doing it like, let's say the stove costs $500. Well, instead of taking $500 in that year, they can depreciate that over time. There's a certain, I mean, there's all dollars amount you want to clarify with your CPA, but a lot of times people miss the mark about investment properties because it's not really about the cash flow, but the tax benefits.
Right.
So as we're sitting here today, it's a really good investment for building true wealth, because you can imagine if you're not having to pay as much on taxes because you have all of this deductions.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So many benefits. So yeah, I'm excited for just our properties, and hopefully get one under our belts soon. Well, I say our belts, me and Zach, and I know you're helping out with that. So, but if anybody's interested in long-term rentals and just hearing more about that, I know we could go all day about it, because it is a big topic.
It is a big topic.
Especially tenants and everything. But, so, whoops.
And, I will say a little bit, just, because COVID kind of changed the shelf, if you will.
Yeah.
And now I look at different counties differently.
Yeah.
Because after I saw what happened in certain counties around our area, I'm like, I'm a little hesitant to have a long-term rental in that area.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So definitely, if it's something that you are interested in, make sure you're doing your research, not only about the property, but just the environment and what's going on and things like that. Because ever changing.
And that's why we have the Mom Investor Starter Kit. So
So if you don't know, we have tons of resources on our website at www.moneymakingmamas.com. No G. And we'd appreciate so much if you follow, subscribe, like, comment, share on social media or any of our podcast episodes. And Mom, anything else?
No, I was just going to say a couple things about garbage disposals.
That's so random.
I know. It just popped in my head, though, when we were asking, because I know a landlord that doesn't provide garbage disposals because so many times they get jammed.
Yeah.
And I actually have a story about garbage disposal, because that is a big thing that happens in rental properties is garbage. So he doesn't do that, but then I'm like, if you don't have a garbage disposal, they're just going to keep throwing other things down there. But one time a tenant, they said, oh, the sink is clogged, call a plumber. So we did, and the plumber came out, and what had happened is, remember ramen noodles?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so everybody in college, anyway, they had taken a whole packet of ramen noodles and put it in the garbage disposal, and it didn't go down, and it clogged it.
Oh,
And he was able to pull it out because the call was like $125. So the tenant in our leases, we write any stoppages due to tenant use, they have to pay the bill. So that tenant, she up and down was not going to pay. That wasn't her fault. I have the pictures because one of the things about plumbers is they like to take pictures. It might be nasty. And I was like, what is, because when he sent it, I was like, is that ramen noodles? And he's like, yep. So she fought it, and anyway, so she finally did pay it. She didn't like it, but she finally did pay it. Yeah. So, and I have another friend, because plumbing stories are like the funniest. So we had another tenant that when we had the hurricane, the one that was in Louisiana, the really bad one, so this was a few years ago. Anyway, this family came to this house, and it was a nice house, because we usually did high-end, the houses we managed were kind of high-end. I think their rent was like, I don't know, $3,500 a month or something. Anyway, so he calls me, and he said, well, Nancy, I need to have a plumber come out, because at the bottom of the toilet, the line that goes into the wall, no, it's a clean story. Okay, there's a shut-off valve, right? Like if you have a leaky toilet, you know. Yeah. So anyway, so he had, and he's telling me the story. He goes, yeah, the toilet was just, running a little bit. So I thought I'd take, well, he broke it off. And he goes, and then when I broke it off, so he's telling me he broke it off, and water went everywhere.
Oh, no.
So to the tune of $600 fixed, So then I had to tell him, I was like, okay, got it all taken care of and whatnot. And I said, well, by the way, you owe this bill. What? I was like, and we used to record, you can record, because I just learned you need to record the conversation. I was like, yeah. And he had admitted to breaking that off. And I also had followed up with an email. And so he didn't have the $600. So we had to make payment. I mean, he did pay. He did understand.
Yeah.
But he made payments. And I think he was paying like $50 a month for a $600. What is that? That's 12 months or something like that. But he finally paid it or whatnot. And what I was going to say about that, he came from the hurricane, because there was a lot of people that came to Texas when there's a big hurricane in Louisiana there. Really, really nice family. They'd always owned their own home. Yeah. So
he was used to just kind of fixing it himself.
Yes. Yeah. And it was probably old and whatever, but yeah, that was, and he happened to have a landlord that was, or an owner that was, cheap.
So don't be cheap.
Don't be cheap. So, but yeah, and I guess, with being a property manager, when you do hire one, you have to find one that's professional, that'll teach, the office that I went into, the girl before me, she was really, really nice. And I just wasn't friends with the tenants. You know what I mean? And so she would they get locked out. She'd go take them a bottle of wine and let them in. And I was like,
you have to have those boundaries.
Yeah. So I had boundaries.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's so good information. And if you have any other questions or anything, get yourself a garbage disposal. Don't break stuff if you're a tenant. Write stuff in. All right. Thanks, Mom.
All right. Thanks. See you next time.
Okay. Hopefully it recorded because my thing went.
Oh. So I just was talking like.
Yeah. That's why
Oh.
Yeah, it shut off.
Oh.
So I don't know when it shut off.